Today, we will discuss Joseph Stalin's biography, and throughout this documentary, we shall answer the following questions. When was Joseph Stalin born? When did Joseph Stalin die? What was Joseph Stalin's childhood like? Where was Joseph Stalin educated? And how did Joseph Stalin change the world? Joseph Stalin, Russian in full Iosif Vissarionovich Stalin, original name, Georgian, Iosif Zugashvili, was born on December 18, 1878, in Gori, Georgia, Russian Empire, died March 5, 1953, Moscow, Russia, USSR, Secretary-General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, 1922–53, and Premier of the Soviet State, 1941–53, who for a quarter of a century dictatorially ruled the Soviet Union and transformed it into a significant world power. During the quarter of a century preceding his death, the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin probably exercised greater political power than any other historical figure. Stalin industrialized the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, forcibly collectivized its agriculture, consolidated his position by intensive police terror, helped to defeat Germany in 1941–45, and extended Soviet controls to include a belt of Eastern European states. The chief architect of Soviet totalitarianism and a skilled but phenomenally ruthless organizer, he destroyed the remnants of individual freedom. He failed to promote individual prosperity, yet he created a mighty military-industrial complex and led the Soviet Union into the nuclear age. Stalin's biography was long obscured by a mendacious Soviet-propagated legend exaggerating his prowess as a heroic Bolshevik boy conspirator and faithful follower of Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union. In his prime, Stalin was hailed as a universal genius, as a shining sun, or the staff of life, and also as a great teacher and friend, especially of those communities he most savagely persecuted. Once he was even publicly invoked as our father by a metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church. Achieving comprehensive visual promotion through busts, statues, and icons of himself, the dictator became the object of a fanatical cult that, in private, he probably regarded with cynicism. Stalin was of Georgian, not Russian origin, and persistent rumors claim that he was Ossetian on the paternal side. He was the son of a poor cobbler in the provincial Georgian town of Gori in the Caucasus, then an imperial Russian colony. The drunken father savagely beat his son. Speaking only Georgian at home, Joseph learned Russian, which he always spoke with a guttural Georgian accent while attending the church school at Gori, 1888–94. He then moved to the Tiflis Theological Seminary, where he secretly read Karl Marx. The chief theoretician of international communism, and other forbidden texts being expelled in 1899 for revolutionary activity, according to the legend, or leaving because of ill health, according to his doting mother. The mother, a devout washerwoman, had dreamed of her son becoming a priest, but Joseph Zugashvili was more ruffianly than clerical in appearance and outlook. He was short, stocky, black-haired, fierce-eyed, with one arm longer than the other, his swarthy face scarred by smallpox contracted in infancy. Physically strong and endowed with prodigious willpower, he early learned to disguise his true feelings and to bide his time, by the Caucasian blood feud tradition. He was implacable in plotting long-term revenge against those who offended him. In December 1899, Zugashvili became, briefly, a clerk in the Tiflis Observatory, the only paid employment he is recorded as having taken outside politics. There is no record of his ever having done manual labor. In 1900, he joined the political underground, fomenting labor demonstrations and strikes in the main industrial centers of the Caucasus. Still, his excessive zeal in pushing duped workers into bloody clashes with the police antagonized his fellow conspirators. After the Social Democrats, Marxist revolutionaries, of the Russian Empire had split into their two competing wings, Menshevik and Bolshevik, in 1903, Stalin joined the second, more militant, of these factions and became a disciple of its leader, Lenin. Between April 1902 and March 1913, Stalin was 7 times arrested for revolutionary activity, undergoing repeated imprisonment and exile. The mildness of the sentences and the ease with which the young conspirator effected his frequent escapes lend color to the unproved speculation that Zugashvili was, for a time, an agent provocateur in the pay of the imperial political police. Stalin made slow progress in the party hierarchy. He attended 3 policymaking conclaves of the Russian Social Democrats, in Tammerfors, now Tampere, Finland, 1905, Stockholm, 1906, and London, 1907, without making much impression. But he was active behind the scenes, helping to plot a spectacular holdup in Tiflis, now Tbilisi, on June 25, June 12, Old Style, 1907, to expropriate funds for the party. His first big political promotion came in January, Old Style, 1912 when Lenin, now in emigration, co-opted him to serve on the first Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party, which had finally broken with the other Social Democrats. In the following year, Stalin published, at Lenin's behest, an essential article on Marxism and the national question. By now he had adopted the name Stalin, deriving from Russian stal, steel. He also briefly edited the newly founded Bolshevik newspaper Pravda before undergoing his most extended period of exile, in Siberia from July 1913 to March 1917. In about 1904 Stalin had married a pious Georgian girl, Ekaterina Svanets. She died some 3 years later and left a son, Jacob, whom his father treated with contempt, calling him a weakling after an unsuccessful suicide attempt in the late 1920s. When the Germans took Jacob prisoner during World War II, Stalin refused a German offer to exchange his son. Reaching Petrograd from Siberia on March 25, March 12, Old Style, 1917, Stalin resumed editorship of Pravda. He briefly advocated Bolshevik cooperation with the provisional government of middle-class liberals that had succeeded in uneasy power on the last Tsar's abdication during the February Revolution. But under Lenin's influence, Stalin soon switched to the more militant policy of armed seizure of power by the Bolsheviks. When their coup d'état occurred in October, Old Style, 1917, he played an important role, but one less prominent than that of his chief rival, Leon Trotsky. Active as a politico-military leader on various fronts during the Civil War of 1918-20, Stalin also held 2 ministerial posts in the new Bolshevik government, being Commissar for Nationalities, 1917-23, and for State Control, or Workers' and Peasants' Inspection, 1919-23. But it was his position as Secretary-General of the party's Central Committee, from 1922 until his death, that provided the power base for his dictatorship. Besides heading the Secretariat, he was also a member of the powerful Politburo and of many other interlocking and overlapping committees, an arch-bureaucrat engaged in quietly outmaneuvering brilliant rivals, including Trotsky and Grigory Zinoviev, who despised such mundane organizational work. Because the pockmarked Georgian was so obviously unintellectual, they thought him unintelligent, a gross error, and one literally fatal in their case. From 1921 onward Stalin flouted the ailing Lenin's wishes until, a year before his death, Lenin wrote a political testament, since widely publicized, calling for Stalin's removal from the Secretary-Generalship. Coming from Lenin, this document was potentially ruinous to Stalin's career, but his usual luck and skill enabled him to have it discounted during his lifetime. After Lenin's death, in January 1924, Stalin promoted an extravagant, quasi-Byzantine cult of the deceased leader. Archpriest of Leninism, Stalin also promoted his own cult in the following year by having the city of Tsaritsyn renamed Stalingrad, now Volgograd. His main rival, Trotsky, once Lenin's heir apparent, was now in eclipse, having been ousted by the ruling triumvirate of Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev, and Stalin. Soon afterward Stalin joined with the rightist leaders Nikolai Bukharin and Alexei Rykov in an alliance directed against his former co-triumvirs. Pinning his faith in the ability of the Soviet Union to establish a viable political system without waiting for the support hitherto expected from worldwide revolution, the Secretary-General advocated a policy of socialism in one country. This was popular with the hard-headed party managers whom he was promoting to influential positions in the middle hierarchy. His most powerful rivals were all dismissed, Bukharin and Rykov soon following Zinoviev and Kamenev into disgrace and political limbo pending execution. Stalin expelled Trotsky from the Soviet Union in 1929 and had him assassinated in Mexico in 1940. In 1928 Stalin abandoned Lenin's quasi-capitalist new economic policy in favor of headlong state-organized industrialization under a succession of 5-year plans. This was, in effect, a new Russian Revolution more devastating in its effects than those of 1917. The dictator's blows fell most heavily on the peasantry, some 25 million rustic households being compelled to amalgamate in collective or state farms within a few years. Resisting desperately, the reluctant mujiks were attacked by troops and political police units. Uncooperative peasants, termed kulaks, were arrested en masse and shot, exiled, or absorbed into the rapidly expanding network of Stalinist concentration camps and worked to death under atrocious conditions. Collectivization caused a great famine in Ukraine, and Stalin's policies, some of which targeted Ukraine specifically, compounded the death and misery. Stalin continued to export the grain stocks that a less cruel leader would have rushed to the famine-stricken areas. In Ukraine, this famine came to be known as the Holodomor, from the Ukrainian words for hunger, holod, and extermination, more. Some 10 million peasants may have perished through Stalin's policies during these years. Crash industrialization was less disastrous in its effects, but it, too, numbered its grandiose failures, to which Stalin responded by arraigning industrial managers in a succession of show trials. Intimidated into confessing imaginary crimes, the accused served as self-denounced scapegoats for catastrophes arising from the Secretary-General's policies. Yet Stalin was successful in rapidly industrializing a backward country, as was widely acknowledged by enthusiastic contemporary foreign witnesses, including Adolf Hitler and such well-known writers as H. G. Wells and George Bernard Shaw. Among those who vainly sought to moderate Stalin's policies was his young second wife, Nadezhda Alolaeva, whom he had married in 1919 and who committed suicide in 1932. They had 2 children. The son, Vasily, perished as an alcoholic after rising to an unmerited high rank in the Soviet Air Force. The daughter, Svetlana, became the object of her father's alternating affection and bad temper. She emigrated after his death and later wrote memoirs that illuminate Stalin's well-camouflaged private life. In late 1934, just when the worst excesses of Stalinism seemed to have spent themselves, the Secretary-General launched a new campaign of political terror against the very Communist Party members who had brought him to power. His pretext was the assassination, in Leningrad on December 1, of his leading colleague and potential rival, Sergei Kirov. That Stalin himself had arranged Kirov's murder as an excuse for the promotion of mass bloodshed was strongly hinted at by Nikita Khrushchev, first secretary of the party, in a speech denouncing Stalin at the 20th Party Congress in 1956. Stalin used the show trial of leading communists to expand the new terror. In August 1936, Zinoviev and Kamenev were paraded in court to repeat fabricated confessions. Sentenced to death, and shot, 2 more significant trials followed, in January 1937 and March 1938. In June 1937, Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, the most influential military personality, and other leading generals were reported as court-martialed on charges of treason and executed. Such were the main publicly acknowledged persecutions that empowered Stalin to tame the Soviet Communist Party and the Soviet elite. He not only liquidated veteran semi-independent Bolsheviks but also many party bosses, military leaders, industrial managers, and high government officials totally subservient to himself. Other victims included foreign communists on Soviet territory and members of the very political police organization, now called the NKVD. All other sections of the Soviet elite, the arts, the academic world, and the legal and diplomatic professions, also lost a high proportion of victims, as did the population at large, to a semi-haphazard, galloping persecution that fed on extorted denunciations and confessions. These implicated even more victims until Stalin himself reduced the terror, though he never abandoned it. Stalin's political victims were numbered in tens of millions. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If so, hit or smash the subscribe button and turn on notification to be the first person to be notified whenever we post a new video. Your subscription won't be taken for granted.